Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And the 2043 season for the Oakland A's going very well so far. A 40-14 record through the beginning of June puts us 10 games up on the Angels in the American League West. And we have the best record in the American League and the best record in baseball, as we try to position ourselves as favorably as possible for an eventual playoff appearance as we attempt to win a back-to-back title here in Oakland. Can see we rank first, not surprisingly, out of 30 teams in the latest power rankings. And as we sit here on June 1st, the team statistics are very impressive. First or second in all of the primary batting categories, leading the American League in runs scored, leading the league in steals, although we are the worst base running team by the OOTP metrics. The best defensive team in the American League, and although we're third in the American League in runs allowed, we do have a ridiculous 2.59 earned run average from our starters, which ranks first in baseball. And that is despite some pretty significant injury issues. Doug Weiss has missed the entire season at this point. We anticipated that he would be our number 3 starter this year. Ernesto Comunez, who had moved into the rotation when we had some injuries, got off to a great start with a 4-0 record and a 1.80 ERA, but unfortunately he is gone for the season at this point. Mike Blumenshine just added to the IL with a dead arm that hopefully won't become a major issue for him. And Macho Rangel started the season on the IL, although he's now 3-2 with a 3.29 ERA over 7 starts since he came back. So the injury issues for the starting rotation have been significant, and although, as I noted, the starters overall have pitched incredibly well. But I did talk at the end of our last episode about what the trade block looked like for pitchers at this point. Highlighted a couple of pitchers. The highest ceiling is clearly Alejandro Espinoza, 25-year-old left-hander from the Royals organization, who has been one of the best pitchers in baseball since he came up, only 25 years old, and he's already got a career WAR of over 25. But did have a very significant injury last year, pitched just 4 games for the Royals. It was a torn labrum in his left shoulder, which is his throwing shoulder, so that's a pretty significant injury. And he's now fragile in terms of his injury proneness, also making a lot of money and very expensive for us to potentially bring on board. The other guy that I mentioned was Esteban Narvaez, a 33-year-old veteran, also a lefty with the Houston organization. Has not been quite as successful as Espinoza over the course of his career. His 29.5 career WAR is certainly higher, but he is also almost 8 years older than Mr. Espinoza. And you can see with a 105 ERA plus and a 91 FIP minus, although Narvaez is a 3-time All-Star and has been a very effective major league pitcher, those numbers pale in comparison to the 136 ERA plus and 65 FIP minus that Espinoza has put up over the course of his career. In Narvaez's favor, however, is that he's normal in terms of his injury proneness, and we're not necessarily looking for an ace right now, as the top 2 pitchers in our rotation, Federico Arriola and Luis Villarreal, have both been healthy and effective this year. So we may just be looking for a little more depth. Narvaez, unlike Espinoza, isn't necessarily a pure rental, although that $19.4 million option for him next season, when he's going to be 34 years old, might not really be something that we ultimately want him to exercise. But the cost of bringing Narvaez on board is certainly cheaper. As you probably noticed, we only have high scouting accuracy on both of these guys, which is a little frustrating given the massive investment that we've had in scouting over the decades at this point and the great scouts that we've had. You think that we would have a pretty good sense of established major leaguers and what their skill sets are, but since we don't feel urgency to do something immediately, we're picking up scouting reports on both of them to hopefully have very high scouting accuracy before we make a decision. There was a high degree of unanimity among the worldwide scouting department in terms of the Narvaez versus Espinoza debate as to which way to go. Paul West, Blade Staff, Avery Shaham, Wyme943, Scott Donovan, Stanley Rosella, Jarek Braxton, and Peter Hooper all opined on the situation in various forms, and the unanimous decision for a variety of different reasons was to go with the cheaper and healthier Narvaez over the more expensive pure rental and injury-prone Espinoza. So we'll certainly take that into account. I do obviously love Espinoza's ceiling, but get the point that we've had a very effective starting pitching rotation thus far this year, despite those injuries. And the primary thing is to ensure that we bring someone on board who can pitch for us every fifth day, which on Narvaez likely gives us a better chance of than Espinoza. Although the cost for Espinoza is definitely significantly higher, as we touched upon in the previous episode, being able to use Weiss potentially as a resource to try to bring on Espinoza was attractive to me. We did just sign Weiss to an extension this past off season that was certainly front-loaded. But with this latest injury, he is now wrecked in terms of his injury proneness. The hope is that he will be back and healthy and ready to contribute in September and then hopefully into the playoffs. But even though his salary is going to go down to a very reasonable, if he's healthy, $15 million for the next couple of seasons before he can opt out, the fact that his injury proneness is now wrecked and he's on the other side of 30 probably makes me a little more willing to just try to get him off the books soon compared to the way some of you are thinking about this. I do think that the thoughts from the worldwide scouting department on Narvaez versus Espinoza make sense to me. That being said, if we could ultimately use Weiss as currency to bring on someone like Espinoza, who is younger, better, and actually less injury prone, even if it's only a rental, it's still something that I'm going to continue to entertain. Probably don't end up there, but I also don't want to get into a situation where Weiss's injury come September is something that he's not healing from, and he's not able to help us at all in the stretch run or the playoffs. And then he comes off of that injury, say, in December of this year, is wrecked physically, and is damaged to the extent that his ratings are a lot lower, and all of a sudden we have to retain a good chunk of his contract to get him off the books. So going to continue exploring options to maybe move on from Mr. Weiss, and we're going to continue scouting up the likes of Espinoza and Narvaez as we begin the month of June and try to ensure that we ultimately make the right decisions to position our A's as favorably as possible to get back to the World Series and hopefully repeat for the first time. And we're off to a great start in the month of June with a 6-1 record over the first week of the month as we head towards the midway point of the season. 46-15 through our first 61 games. So we're just a little over 20 games away from when OOTP considers the midway point of the season and we get our mid-season evaluation. A lot of little events happened this past week. Our young platoon infielder, David Palomares, had a 3-home run game in Camden Yards, still hitting only .216 on the season, but definitely the explosiveness of that one game certainly makes us inclined to continue giving him a shot. As we talked about at the end of the last episode, the platoon with Palomares playing an infield spot for us, second base against right-handed pitching, and Mr. Swenson playing shortstop for us against left-handed pitching, has not been incredibly productive offensively, but it hasn't been a complete disaster as of yet either, particularly given the good defense that they both bring to the table. Is the most obvious position if we're trying to upgrade an everyday player as we get closer to the trade deadline. So it's something that we'll keep an eye on over the next 7 or 8 weeks as we approach the trade deadline, but not feeling any real urgency to do anything with a winning percentage of over .750 at this point. We also got our scouting reports back on Espinoza and Narvaez, so very high scouting accuracy on both of them. Espinoza certainly looks similar to how we had anticipated, and having for him a rough year with a 4.37 ERA, but he still has put up a 1.6 WAR on the season. Certainly could help us, but going to be very expensive in terms of the salary that we're taking on, and what we would need to give up for him is a rental. Esteban Narvaez also looks pretty similar to how we thought he would look. He's 6-3 with a 3.61 ERA and a 1.9 WAR on the season. So he's actually been even more effective this year than the higher priced and more highly regarded Mr. Espinoza. Jake Ortega, the sad saga with him continues. Going to miss 2 to 3 months now with a hamstring strain. He has just 31 at-bats at the major league level this year. When he plays, he remains productive, putting up a ridiculous 186 WRC+. The issue is the Yankees have just been unable to keep him healthy. You may remember we played him at DH primarily over his last season and a half with us to try to keep him healthy before he left for the Yankees. Given that he still has some value as a fielder, the Yankees have tried to play him in the field more often, but it's led to a lot of injuries and a really kind of somewhat sad ending to what was a career that looked like it could be headed to the Hall of Fame over his first 6 or 7 seasons with us in Oakland before the injuries got the best of him. Another one of our former players, Alejandro Landin, going to miss 5 months with a concussion, so his season is over. He left us a couple of years ago, went with Minnesota last year, and the fragile 32, soon-to-be 33-year-old, going to have just 55 games and 194 at-bats for the Angels this year. Got back to a 118 WRC plus and a 1.7 WAR while he was healthy this year, so kind of was on his way for a vintage Alejandro Landin season. But unfortunately, the injuries are catching up with Flea Landin as well. Last point of reference, Chisen Iwata, our young second baseman, hit 500 this past week with a couple of homers and 5 ribbies to win the American League Player of the Week award. And with a more accurate scouting report on Mr. Narvaez, we decided to start exploring trade options, and it's really an offer that we can't refuse. The Astros are rebuilding, and they have tons of money, so they're willing to retain all of Narvaez's contract for this year and potentially next year if he opts in. So he's essentially free to us for at least the rest of this year in terms of our salary obligations, which will give us an opportunity to remain active in the trade market going forward if we need to supplement our starting pitching further, or perhaps look for infield help, as we talked about earlier. But in addition to getting Narvaez, we get starting pitching prospect Robbie Harvey. Doesn't necessarily look like he's going to be anything but a borderline fifth starter, but he's 22 years old, durable, good influence on others. Certainly happy to bring him on board. And also the first baseman, Juan Cisneros, a guy who's actually likely to end up on the IL. Doesn't really look like a big-time player, a right-handed hitting first baseman with a marginal bat for the major leagues. But a little more organizational depth for us, and they'll also even include a little bit of extra cash. We do have to give up a high potential prospect in Jorge Nieves. You may remember we picked him up in the trade with the Mets in December or November of last year when the offseason was just getting underway. Left-handed hitting center fielder who we think could be an outstanding contact hitter, decent speed, good in the clubhouse, decent defensive outfielder, and obviously a lot of potential for him to get better. He was set to begin at our DSL team, which hasn't even started playing yet as of June 8th. So we don't know what he's done this year. But given that the financial terms of this contract or this trade are so favorable for us, it seems like one of those trades every 5 or 6 years. It seems like there's one that just shows up, and it's kind of a no-brainer. Normally the trade settings make the trades pretty painful for us, but although Nieves probably 5 years from now is going to be by far the most valuable player of anyone involved in this trade, it's going to be several years until he's ready to contribute at the major league level, and the opportunity to bolster our rotation with a 3-time All-Star who's essentially going to be free for us this year, as well as a couple of marginal prospects and a little bit more cash, is just too attractive to me to pass up. So we are going to go ahead and complete the deal, and we've a week into June supplemented our starting staff to hopefully give us a little more insurance in case of additional injuries. And with the addition of Narvaez, we've put him in the number 4 hole in the rotation, moved Baumler down to his traditional 5th starter spot. Mike Homer back into a long relief role as the two-way player. Only got 1 start for us and was not particularly effective in that start. And Savion Keys, the youngster, back down to the minor leagues. And our A's just continue to dominate the major leagues, a 6-0 week, running our winning streak to 10 games. So as we sit here in the middle of June, 52-15 record, we are now up 15 games on the Los Angeles Angels for the division. And with a .554 winning percentage, the Angels having a pretty good season, but they're still 15 behind us. The Tigers continue to play some great baseball, but they are 6 games behind us in the standings for the best record in baseball, despite a winning percentage of close to .700. The youngster Juan Ramirez tied for the league lead in ribbies. Bobby Armstrong leading the league in steals. Godina is second in OPS. Armstrong and Godina are 2-3 in batter war. And pitching-wise, Luis Villarreal, the youngster, his first full year in the majors, a 1.95 ERA. Ariola Villarreal in the injured Blumenshine, 1-2-3 in the American League in wins. And Joe Heilman, second in the league with 19 saves, despite having spent a little bit of time on the IL earlier this year. And good news, Mike Blumenshine seems to have recovered from that dead arm well, so we'll be adding him back into the rotation. So it's going to be a very left-handed centric rotation. Presumably Baumler will be the one losing his spot in the rotation. So 4 out of our 5 starters are lefties. But with a 52-15 record, doesn't seem like that's caused a major problem thus far. And only a 3-3 week for our Oakland A's, and after extending the winning streak to 12, we've actually lost 3 out of our last 4, losing a series to the Twins. Another pitching injury, Macho Rangel, biceps tendonitis, going to be out for about 2 months, so that one is certainly more significant. Rangel, who we picked up in a trade with Colorado this past offseason, 6-2 with a 2.41 ERA. We did know he was fragile when we brought him on board, but thought that as a 24-year-old lefty whose price was not extreme and has outstanding stamina, that he was a guy worthy of bringing on board. But certainly the recent addition of Mr. Narvaez going to be even more important with Rangel on the IL. That'll move Baumler back in the rotation, and will go back down to AAA to reunite with someone we sent down recently to fill the opening on the 26-man. And our A's definitely struggled towards the end of the month of June. Lost 5 out of our last 6 games during the month after that blistering start. Still, as we sit here on July 1st, exactly midway through the season, a 58-23 record, so on pace to win 116 games, not quite the 120 that we won last season, but still a lofty total. The lead over the A's is 14.5 in the division, but with our struggles of late and Detroit continuing to play great baseball, the Tigers only a game and a half behind our A's for the best record in the American League and the best record in baseball. Bobby Armstrong continues to lead the league in steals. Both Armstrong and Godina have fallen out of the leaderboard for batter WAR, but Jonah Richards, despite missing almost a month, or I think actually a little over a month when all was said and done, due to that injury, already up to a 3.2 batter WAR, which ranks 3rd in the American League as he tries to make a case despite missing a month to win a back-to-back MVP award. Arriola tied for the league lead with 10 wins at this point, and Heilman still tied for 2nd in saves at the midway point of the season. And we should be getting our mid-season evaluation tomorrow, I believe, from Mr. Fisher after we get through our first 82 games of the year. And we'll do our mid-season review as we sit here on July 3rd. Pleased with our team record thus far. Still wants us to bring in a power hitter, and Mr. Fisher does not like to be ignored. Well, Mr. Fisher, you're kind of an idiot because you cut our budget this past year, and we're 2nd in the American League in home runs, so not really sure exactly what bringing in a power hitter is going to do. As we sit here 83 games into the season, 60-23 record, 18-9 record in June was our worst month of the season thus far, which kind of says it all. Still 1st in the American League in runs scored, and 1st or 2nd in all of the primary offensive categories. We've improved to 12th in base running. We've also improved to 1st in the American League in runs allowed, still leading the league in starters ERA, although it has crept up to 2.99, but the bullpen ERA getting better. Top half of the league in all of the primary pitching categories, and 1st in defensive efficiency and 1st in zone ratings, so our A's squad remains a juggernaut. And we'll take a look at our pitching first, and clearly the injuries have been the big story there. Doug Weiss and Macho Rangel, who were both in our starting rotation, or supposed to be in our starting rotation as of the beginning of the season, both out until September, most likely. And Ernesto Comunez, who filled in due to some of those injuries and was expected to be an important swingman and emergency starter for us. His season is over, as he still has 6 months of recovery left from those bone chips. Hopefully he'll be healthy and well for spring training next year. But the hope is that Rangel and or Weiss will be able to contribute in September and compete for a spot in our playoff rotation. Pitching-wise, Federico Arriola, our ace, 11-4 with a 3.55 ERA, only a 1.5 WAR, so honestly a bit of a down year for Mr. Arriola as he pursues a third consecutive American League Cy Young Award. The youngster Luis Villarreal, first full season in the majors, 10-4 record with a 2.75 ERA, whip below 1, striking out 10.3 batters per 9 innings, and a 2.7 WAR. Would think that the young lefty is going to be a very strong candidate for a Rookie of the Year award. Mike Blumenshine, back from an injury, 7-1 record with a 1.62 ERA. Good season for the fragile product who we picked 20th overall out of Brown 7 years ago. Esteban Narvaez, the new addition, 1-2 with a 4.95 ERA in his first 4 starts in Oakland, so has not been as effective as he was in Houston to get the season underway. But still has put up half a win above replacement level over those 4 starts. And then Dave Baumler, the veteran at this point, 7-3 with a 3.72 ERA. He has started 12 games for us this year among the 17 that he's pitched due to injuries. So even with 3 potential starters on the injured list, we have 5 very good, solid major league starters in the rotation, and still feeling pretty good about the way we're positioned. Joe Heilman having a real nice year as a closer, a 1.52 ERA with 23 saves, spectacular shutdown to meltdown ratio of 15-1 thus far, and a WAR of almost 2. So he's been very effective, even though he's pitching fewer innings than he did a year ago when we had him in the stopper role at times. Wilson Rangel, 0-2 record, but a 3.16 ERA over 37 innings for us, and a 16-3 shutdown to meltdown ratio, so also pretty productive as a reliever. Jonathan Shearer, kind of an off year for him. The ERA is ballooned to 4.06. And our final setup man, Eric Keach, another former All-Star, has had a rough start to the year, 7.41 ERA. He's pitched only 17 innings. We've struggled to find him consistent work, given how good the starters have been and the rest of the bullpen have been. Savion Keys has been up and down a couple of times this year, 4.32 ERA with 11 strikeouts over 8 1/3 innings. The 14th round pick out of Clemson has developed into a pretty interesting left-handed relief prospect for us. David Ibarra, finally, after spending last year going back and forth between Las Vegas and Oakland, looks like he's establishing himself as a major leaguer. 2.72 ERA over 39 2/3 innings pitched, 160 ERA plus, and an 86 FIP minus for the 23-year-old with the fantastic fastball and splitter. Jesus Berlanga, another guy who's made his major league debut this year, a 3.18 ERA over 17 innings pitched, does have 24 strikeouts in limited usage. He's also spent some time in AAA for us. And Bobby Surgener, the lefty, 2.62 ERA over 34 1/3 innings pitched, having a very similar season to what he did for us a year ago. Last but not least, Mike Homer, the two-way player, hasn't been particularly good as a pitcher, with a 5.45 ERA over 38 innings. and we'll talk about him as a batter. Hasn't had much of an opportunity there. Just 2 for 11, started only 2 games and played in only 3 others, hitting just a .182, and he has struck out 5 times in his 11 at-bats. I think with his defensive versatility, his pitching versatility, his left-handed bat, his durability on a lesser team, he'd be a pretty interesting and useful super utility guy. But with our team being so deep and so good, the opportunities for Homer to get regular playing time are still few and far between. Turning to our everyday players, and a lot of good things to talk about here as well. Backup catcher Ron Markley hitting just a .190 this year in 63 at-bats. Does have a couple of home runs, and he's walked 11 times, so a 74 WRC plus, and he's still been above replacement level. Given that Markley is set to make $5.5 million next year, and we, as always, are going to be very up against it in terms of our salaries, we will likely be moving on from Mr. Markley at the end of this season. Hopefully there will be a little bit of trade value left in him, and presumably we'll be promoting the youngster Luis Covarrubias to take over as our backup catcher. He's an outstanding defensive player who was up earlier when Jonah Richards was hurt. Richards, as we've talked about, has put up a 3.1 WAR over the first half of the season despite missing a month on the IL. Overall, 327 average, 15 homers, 37 ribbies, and a ridiculous 194 WRC plus. So Mr. Richards, who was the Rookie of the Year 2 years ago in 2041 and the most valuable player last year, remains one of the premier players in all of baseball. Luis Godina, the first baseman, won the batting title a year ago, and he's hitting .321 this year with 16 homers and 48 ribbies, 164 WRC plus, and a 3.2 WAR. Another vintage Luis Godina season. Juan Ramirez, our designated hitter, 20 homers and 66 ribbies, hitting .276, put up a win above replacement. Brings very little to the table defensively, but still a very interesting power bat. Had 41 homers and 134 ribbies as a rookie last year. And you can see he's basically on pace to put up very similar numbers this season. The potential weak area, as we alluded to, is that platoon of Palomares and Swenson. Palomares, the young left-handed hitting infielder, batting just 200 and 180 at-bats, does have 9 homers and 33 ribbies, but when all is said and done, just a 64 WRC plus, and he's been slightly below replacement level. So we wanted to give him an opportunity this year, but he has certainly not seized it as of yet. Phil Swenson hitting .267 in 195 at-bats for us, 98 WRC plus and a 1.3 WAR. So he's been able to take advantage of his playing time a bit better than Mr. Palomares has, playing primarily against left-handed pitching for us, although he certainly is also an important substitute when the other middle infielders are banged up and need a day off. We've already talked about Mike Homer. Hasn't really done much for us either as a pitcher or as a utility player thus far this year, but with potential injuries still to come, maybe he will show more value in the second half of the year. Juan Pimentel, the third baseman, having another good, solid Juan Pimentel year, batting over 300, 21 steals already, 21 doubles, 4 triples, 13 homers, on pace for over 100 runs scored and over 100 ribbies with a 131 WRC plus and a 3.1 WAR. Pimentel was the Rookie of the Year in 2039 and the MVP in 2040. By his standards, the last two seasons, 2041 and 2042, with wars of 4.5 to 5, were down years for him. Looks like he's on his way to a bounce back year this season. And then Chisin Iwata hitting 291, 35 doubles already midway through the season, 4 triples, only 5 homers, but he still put up a 122 WRC plus, which is the best figure that we've seen from him since his Rookie of the Year season in 2040. His 3.2 WAR is close to what he put up the last couple seasons. So some nice bounce back years from the likes of Iwata and Pimentel. Not that they were bad before, but good to see them performing even better than they did last season. Turning to our outfield, left fielder Darnell Selvey, 277 average, 10 homers, 45 ribbies. A 118 WRC plus is definitely a down year for Selvey, but 118 WRC plus is still a pretty productive offensive season. Jesus Aguilar is our fourth outfielder. He's hitting 286 in 56 at-bats. Couple of homers, stolen 4 bases, and put up a 126 WRC plus. Versatile defensively, good speed, perfect, especially with that left-handed bat. Utility outfielder for us. Arturo Uresti, the right fielder, batting average is dipped to 239 this year, 11 homers and 35 ribbies. Uresti now 30 years old. 3 straight Gold Glove awards for him, and he's also won a couple of Silver Sluggers and been an All-Star a couple times. Down year for him with just a 107 WRC plus, but would tend to think that we're going to see a bit more power from him going forward, and he continues to have one of the best eyes in the American League. And Bobby Armstrong finally breaking through this year, 116 WRC plus and a 2.8 WAR on the season. The batting average has dipped to 262, but with 18 doubles, 3 triples, 7 homers, 35 walks, 36 stolen bases. He's got a variety of ways to help us offensively, and seems like Armstrong has finally become that very good, solid combination of offense, speed, and defense at center field that we've been looking for several seasons. So as I think about the team, the question is whether we want to give Swenson more playing time at the expense of Palomares, stick with the Palomares and Swenson platoon, or perhaps make a trade to bring someone on board to help our infield like we did last year when we traded for the first baseman Galterio Mancina and pivoted Godina to second base at the expense of playing time last year for both Swenson and Amare Alcindor. Taking a look at the trade block and among position players, a couple of real familiar names, former center fielder Sergio Palomares and former catcher Byron Brain, both on the trade block. Amari Flagler, third baseman, who is outstanding defensively, but the definition of a league average batter also available. I think he could potentially stabilize an infield position for us, but given that he's put up a 64 WRC plus this year, a year after combining for about a 80 WRC plus between Kansas City and San Diego, don't think at this point that offensively he's going to be much, if any, of an improvement over what we have with Palomares and Swenson. So certainly will be other options we can look at, can try to trade for people who aren't on the trade block, but don't think there's anything particularly compelling to do here as we sit on July 3rd and start thinking a little more seriously about the options in the trade market. Alejandro Espinoza and Jorge Bernal, the top 2 pitchers that are available. Bernal, a right-hander, 30-year-old, is wrecked physically on the last year of his contract with the Rockies. 4-3 with a 4.32 ERA and 17 starts in Colorado. Tend to think his cost is going to certainly be less than Espinoza, although they still want a big-time player to rent him. That is not a demand that we are likely to meet for Tuna Bernal. Espinoza pushed his record to 7-4 with a 3.68 ERA and a 2.8 WAR. So he remains a very effective pitcher when he's been healthy. He is fragile physically, as we've talked about. Nobody who makes the deal work immediately. Doug Weiss did have some value a month ago when we looked at this. And if we were to supplement in, again, one of the top players in our organization, either our closer Heilman, our catcher Richards, or the young starter Villarreal, in conjunction with Weiss, we could rent Espinoza for the end of this season. So the price for Alejandro Espinoza 4 weeks before the trade deadline still seems a bit prohibitive as far as I am concerned. But any decisions that we do make about the trade market and supplementing this team will be done from a position of strength, as despite our struggles over the last week and a half, 2 weeks, we're still 60-23, the best record in baseball, with a 15.5 game lead on the Angels. And even with Rangel, Weiss, and Camunez out, the starting rotation of Arriola, Villarreal, Blumenschein, Narvaez, and Baumler is pretty well established. When the worst of your 5 starters has 7 wins at the midway point of the season, and you've got 3 starters on the injured list, it's pretty hard to argue that things aren't going pretty well despite those injuries. And we'll talk more about the trade market and start planning for the 2043 draft in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.